Hey everyone, this is my review of episode 8 of WandaVision. Only one more to go after this. All right, I'm sure that like you, I was expecting very big things for episode 8. And on the one hand, it was very satisfying and we got a lot of information and it really revealed the secrets of what's going on. But on the other hand, I was also a little disappointed, and so I'm going to get into both the good and the bad. So first off, last week we got the big reveal of Agatha all along. I'm a huge fan of Agatha and anything having to do with Catherine Hahn, so that was great. And so this episode was very satisfying in the sense that we got her backstory, and it really focused on her and why her motivations, why she is here in the Hex with Wanda, what her role has been up until this point, and what she's hoping to get from her. So the flashbacks that we're getting of things, some of which we've seen before, some of which are new, kind of filling in backstory for Wanda and how she grew up and how she ended up being a witch, which we learned at the end of this episode. That was cool. A lot of great backstory and just great moments from Wanda. As I've made very clear in previous episodes, I'm a huge fan of both the Scarlet Witch, the character, and how she's been portrayed in the MCU, and how she's been played by Elizabeth Olsen. I'm just a huge fan of everything having to do with Wanda. So even coming into the show, I was really excited. And so that was great. And she had some great moments in this episode of really understanding where her trauma is coming from. But on the other hand, it's a little bit of melodrama. This didn't feel authentic. You wouldn't expect it to feel super authentic in a superhero TV show. But while I enjoyed it, it didn't really hit home for me. One thing that I thought was really cool was how they kind of tied in all of the DVDs that the father had been selling on the black market, and that was what created Wanda's love of television. So we get an understanding of why she was creating this world, and we get a much better understanding of how carefully constructed all of the episodes have been in terms of what we're seeing, what it means to Wanda as a person. It wasn't just an idle conceit. It's really tied into who she is, and the idea of creating a fantasy world fits in very nicely with her powers and the role that she has filled in very important, pivotal moments in the history of Marvel Comics. And so to see that being brought to the MCU, fantastic. And I'd also like to toot my own horn going back to my review of the first two episodes. I was very clear that episode 1 was clearly an homage to primarily the Dick Van Dyke Show. It was so obvious, the set, the costumes, everything, the boss coming to dinner, it all fit so perfectly with the Dick Van Dyke Show. And yet online I saw a lot more references to I Love Lucy and Bewitched, which the next episode, episode 2, and those got released together, so you can see how that would be blended together. But a lot more mentions of I Love Lucy than Dick Van Dyke, when clearly it was a tribute primarily to Dick Van Dyke. So score 1 for me. And of course, I've already mentioned Agatha for the win. She is just great. I love her character. I love seeing that moment when she was waiting in the car and Vision came up to her and getting that more information about her in that moment, and just how she's been manipulating everything, and just everything to do with the character and the way that Catherine Hahn is portraying her. And if she were to get killed off at the end of the next episode, I hope that would create a revolt, because I can't believe that I'm the only one that is so much a fan of Catherine Hahn and Agatha. And it's great to see that character being brought to the comics and being played by one of my favorite actors. So that's all fantastic. But like I said, it was also a little bit of a letdown. Nothing that was revealed in this latest episode felt like a surprise, even when it was new information. It didn't feel like surprising information. It just kind of filled in some of the gaps or some of the backstory that we didn't know yet. And all along, I think anyone that was clued into the comics and had been paying attention to the rumors and what the show was going to be about, we knew this is where it was all headed, and we knew that that was going to be Agatha, not Agnes, some random housewife neighbor. And so we knew it was going to be about witches. We knew that ultimately, not only are we going to get the Scarlet Witch for the first time, and we're going to fully explore her magic powers, but we also knew that we were going to be funneling into the multiverse, because we know this leads into the next Doctor Strange movie. And so we knew it was going to be about magic, and we knew it was going to be about the multiverse. And so nothing about this last episode felt, like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. It was all, yeah, I know this is what I expected to happen. And so while it was cool and I enjoyed it, it wasn't like overwhelmingly good. And when you come to Marvel anything, you expect to be overwhelmed with how awesome it is. So like I said, a little bit of a letdown. And I also think part of that was because, as much as I love Agatha, I think that this show so far has been at its best when we have both Wanda and Vision. It's WandaVision after all. And even when they weren't in the same scene together, their scenes playing off each other as we see Wanda kind of devolving and her world, her control over the world, slowly giving way. At the same time, Vision is learning more about the world, and both of these actors have been giving such great performances. And so the show has been best when it's both of them, both together and apart. And that's the real heart of this TV show, I think, and what I'm most invested in. And obviously, we've been prepared for that from the previous movies, because that's the one thing that we knew about these characters, is their relationship with each other. So it was disappointing not to have Vision, other than White Vision. We'll get to that in a moment. So I think that's one part of the disappointment. Another is just that these episodes are too short, right? I mean, I know they must have to keep it short to keep it within budget. And so that's kind of disappointing. But I guess it shouldn't be too much of a complaint, because there have been so many shows on Netflix, the Marvel Netflix shows for sure, where you're like, oh, they need 8 episodes of a show. And so we're going to have to stretch out this premise to fit all 8 episodes. And that's when you get episodes that don't feel necessary. And when the writing isn't really top notch, it can feel bloated. And so this show has definitely not been bloated, director Hayward aside. And I don't think director Hayward, that's not bloat. That is a lack of imagination with that character. It's not a creative enough character. And so maybe in the end, the short episodes is a good thing, because there's never been a point where I'm like, wow, when is this going to be over? And my last disappointment, just I missed Pietro in this episode, and I'm really looking forward to finding out what was going on between him and Monica. So with that said, let's get to my predictions for the final episode of WandaVision. First off, we had the mid-credit scene at the very end of the episode. That's where we got White Vision revealed. And so obviously, it's not just like in the comics where they took Vision and they turned him into this kind of blank slate character that they can control, and maybe not have to fear that he would go rogue again and be a danger to the entire world. But in this case, in this show, we have 2 Visions now, and obviously they're going to meet at some point, and that's going to be really interesting. We're obviously going to have to see the Wanda versus Agatha climax. That's going to be interesting, how that's going to play out. And as previously mentioned, Monica versus Pietro, we're going to have to figure out how that's going to play out. So that's 3, pairs of conflict. Not to mention we still have Director Hayward and Darcy and Jimmy. They all have to kind of get resolved, all their storylines. And so that's a lot. There's a lot to get through in one last episode. And while finally they're saying that this last episode is going to be longer than the others. How long is that going to be? To be determined. And so my biggest question for the final episode is how much is going to get resolved? Are we going to be stuck with some major cliffhangers or some major, oh, we're going to have to wait until the new Doctor Strange movie or any of the other movies to see where this is going to go next? Or is it going to feel like a complete story that has been tied up where, yes, there will be a continuation, but it feels complete? I think that, just my guess based on how Marvel has done everything except Infinity Wars, is that yes, this will be a complete story that also leads into the next story. So I think all of those things that I just mentioned are going to have to get resolved in some way, which has me a little worried because we don't have a lot of time for that resolution to happen, one episode. And so that leads me to another big question, which is how much will the events in this episode lead to permanent change in the MCU? For instance, are the people that Wanda has created or brought back from the dead, like Vision, or maybe she didn't bring him back from the dead. Obviously, I think we now know that it was Agatha that brought Pietro back. But are these permanent change? Are they permanently back alive and in the universe? And so, is this vision that we have now going to continue? I certainly hope so. Is the Pietro that came from the other universe, is he going to stay in the new MCU? I hope so. But I think that whatever happens, we're going to get some kind of, signpost of how what happens in the Hex is going to permanently affect the MCU. Obviously, Monica's powers, those are going to be permanent. She's going to be a figure moving forward, probably in Captain Marvel 2. But it's going to be interesting to see how the MCU as a whole is going to be affected. And based on what we were led to believe beforehand, I think that the changes are going to be big, they're going to be permanent, and it's going to totally change the direction of the MCU. And so that's also putting a lot on this final episode. So it's going to be interesting, and I have high expectations. And so when you have high expectations, you could be, grossly disappointed. Another question I have for the last episode, we've been told that there's going to be another big cameo. The most obvious nominee for that is going to be Doctor Strange. We know that this is going to feed into the Doctor Strange movie. And if that's the big cameo, it doesn't feel big enough, right? Not that I don't love Doctor Strange and love the way he's been portrayed in the MCU, but we already expected it, just like some of these other things. And so I'm hoping to be shocked and like, oh my God. And so who could that be? My hope is that it's more X-Men. The most obvious choice would be Magneto. But we did just see, her father in this episode. It definitely wasn't any Magneto that we've seen before. So yeah, that would be a tough thing to really pull off with all the other things they have to pull off. It doesn't mean I don't hope for it. Another possibility of a huge cameo would be from Spider-Man, because we know he's now been tied into the multiverse, so that would make sense. But my prediction is that it's going to be maybe an all of the above or many different cameos, because what I could see happening is some kind of unraveling of the multiverse happens as Wanda, has to unleash all of her powers more than she's ever done in the past to try to fight off Agatha and save her children. Because if you think that she was upset when Thanos killed her husband or her, fiance, her boyfriend, I don't know. No matter how mad she was at that, it's going to be twice as much, three times as much when it's someone coming after her children. So I could see a scenario where everything starts to unravel, the multiverses start to collide, and so we get glimpses of all these different characters. And then it's like, it's not just one cameo, it's like 100 cameos or, whatever. And we see X-Men and we see characters from all different past Marvel movies. That would be really cool. and it would then lead into the introduction of the X-Men and everything else, Deadpool. So that is my big prediction for the final episode. We'll see how, we only have a few days now before we find out. I can't wait. I'm sure you can't either. Please, if you have any thoughts or predictions, share them in the comments. And if you like this video, I would really appreciate if you like or subscribe. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.